Invited the others.
Yeah, wow.
You could just put musical chairs with
I
it.
wasn't even sure I had a panel until they told me, like, you have a panel at 5 o'clock. I said, great. Who's there? Who's there? You know, anybody with me? And they're like, nope, it's you. I'm like, oh. So half the time I don't know where I'm supposed to be until it's too late. My mom's been telling me that since I was born. So what's going on, man? I'm pretty straightforward. You got a question, raise your hand. You don't have a question, flip the bird, whatever your thing is. I'm pretty easy. So what's on your mind, man? I gotta ask, what is this thing happening here?
A lion Jedi and a fox. I'm sorry. I ain't a Jedi.
Jedis. I can't get creativity points. That's I'm gonna make a Jedi Ranger suit now.
We're working on that.
Okay. Put it on my page. Put it up on Facebook. Let me know. Okay, so questions? Anybody in here that was in my street combative survival class last night? Taught hand-to-hand combat, somebody? You were. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I didn't get here in time.
Cops, military personnel, public servants, firefighters,
Firefighter.
teachers. All right, knew I liked you for a reason. All right, cool. Public servants. Awesome. That's kind of my thing. I spent 16 years, worked as a fire medic, combat medic. Was a busy guy, so I'm retired out of that business now, and now I'm back in the show business where people are shooting cameras instead of rifles at me, and that just works a whole lot better for me. So, what can I do for you guys? Any questions? Things you want to know? Shoot.
Were you upset that you didn't get a cameo for the movie?
No. No, I'm probably the one guy that when I left the show, I'm a pretty decisive individual. Like I set my mind, and then I set my path, and get with me or get out of my way. I'm pretty straightforward. So I haven't really looked back on it. They've asked me to come back several times, of course. Are you on my Facebook page? How many of you are on my Facebook page? Don't worry, you won't offend me. Oh, okay. Either that or you're really good liars. In about a week and a half, if you're on my Facebook page, you will see something I can't tell you about right now regarding the movie. That's all I can say. But, well, I've also had some recent inquiries for a television show, but I'm pretty sure we didn't reach an agreement, so I said, but we'll see. We'll see. Good question. Back there, what do you got?
Why did you become the Ghost Ranger and Rogue?
Well, gosh, I don't remember all the particulars behind it, really. I can tell you that I was working, where was I? I was out of a firehouse in Northern Virginia at the time, and I was waiting tables, bartending, paying my way through a college degree. And I got, I think it was an email or a phone call, and I remember like, hey, how would you like to come out and do 17 episodes as a Gold Ranger, and we'd like to sign you for the second movie for Turbo. I was like, okay, well, send me some scripts, let me take a look. And by the way, send me a real contract with something more than, 10 cents per dollar. And so they sent the contract was decent, and I read over the scripts, and I was like, well, I don't want to be a ranger for the movie. What do you mean you don't want to be a ranger for the movie? It's like, actually, I want to be a bad guy. And you just see steam coming out of their heads. They're like, Jason, bad guy, we can't, like they started twitching, and it got real weird. And pretty soon they warmed up to the idea. Next thing I know, they added Amy to the movie, and then we were both abducted, turned bad, turned back good, saved the day. I was like, wow, okay. So I had a good time. It was 17 episodes, Gold Ranger in and out, and then Turbo the movie. So, which was insane, because they spent a ton of money on the sets for Turbo. I walked in, and it was just maybe this entire upper floor and the floor beneath it in height and size, where they built the volcano scene. It was ridiculous. It was incredible. And I started thinking back to the days in the TV show. It's like, why didn't you guys do this for the show? I couldn't even keep my mask put together. You see scenes where I'm talking in the communicator, different scenes. Most of the time I'm up here like this, Zorda in command. You'll see a few scenes out of like the 100 I did. Good luck finding them. Where I'm holding my watch like this because it was broke and they wouldn't fix it. So, and here we're on this $1 million set for the movie. I was like, you guys suck. But it was kind of fun, and I love hate relationship sort of way. Shoot.
Yes. How did Jason get his powers back? And good forever.
Powers never really leave you, brother. Lives in here. Shoot.
Speaking of Forever Red, what was it like making that, like getting to meet all of the guys who came onto the show after you?
Well, I started feeling a little bit old, I gotta tell you. Who was, I can't remember which one it was. One of them. They were all nice. They were all great guys, so I had no problems with any of that. But it was a little awkward to walk up and have somebody that, you know, is young, buff, in shape, an adult, look at me and be like, I grew up watching you, and he's a Ranger. I'm like, oh, wow. And at the time, I was in my early 30s. So, I mean, I was the youngest of my cast by a lot when we started filming. I signed a contract at 17. And by 18, I was filming. So I was, how they made me the leader is still kind of, I haven't figured that out, but they put me in charge, and everybody else was older than I was. Some of them a lot older. I won't tell you who. David Yost. So anyway, you know, it was kind of weird how that came to be. But it was really neat. You know, they were all gracious. I had no idea there had been so many. I left the show, and like I said, I'm pretty, you know, I find my path and I go, and I don't look back. You know, looking back a lot of times is a waste of time for me. Learn from a mistake, learn from a lesson, and then move on. Time to go. Something else to do, create, be a part of, whatever. So I didn't really look back. So when they called me up out of the blue, they're like, yeah, we're going to bring in all the other Red Rangers. And I was like, well, I knew Frank had been one. I knew Rocky had been one. I was like, okay, how many have there been? I was thinking 2 or 3. They're like, 11. I didn't even know what to say. I was like, wow. Because I didn't realize that after we left the show, they started forcing the cast to change every season, with the exception of the 3 that stayed when 3 of us left. And so that was kind of a trip for me. And Steve didn't end up making it into that episode. I guess he was, I don't know what he had going on. He was
He was
busy with
between
something.
moving.
Yeah, maybe he was moving. So I ended up being there with these 10 other guys, or 9 other guys, and I thought it was pretty cool. Great guys, all of them. They've all brought their own legacy to the Red Ranger. So, yeah.
Being a Power Ranger, I think, is something that a lot of people that watch the show aspire to, you know, a dream they have. I think because of the impact that it's made on them as fans. And I'm just curious if you have any stories of meeting a young fan or a young child that just really moved you and really made you proud of the experience you had on the show.
There's so many. So many. Early on, I met, who was it? I can never remember. Edie was his mother's name. I can never remember her last name, but I still remember she lives in Indiana. And I'm actually wondering if I'm going to see her when I come up to Indiana here soon. We'd been filming maybe a year, and she came out to the set, and her little boy at the time had what they thought was going to be a terminal brain condition. And without sharing her personal information, now that I've said her name. And I remember, you know, money was a problem, insurance was a problem. These were Make-A-Wish kids. So this was their last wish. And money was an issue. She didn't have the money that she needed for the surgery that would save his life. We weren't rich on the show because they just weren't paying us. But I remember meeting with her and meeting with him and the other Rangers. We all met him. It was a great family. And I think Tommy was his favorite Ranger, but I just fell in love with the kid's story. And before she left, I wrote her a check, you know, for everything I could spare. And it turned out to be enough that she could get the surgery. And today, this little boy who wasn't going to make it is in his mid-20s. And, you know, it's powerful. There's other stories like that each of us, all of us have. I can remember going to a cancer hospital in New York City and going in to meet, again, these just heartbreaking situations, little boys, little girls who are not going to make it. And I remember coming to this one room, and they're like, well, you can't go into this one. They're like, you got to put on, and they had me dressed. And before I knew anything about medicine, had me all dressed up in hairs and buns and masks. And felt like I was, going to war. I was like, he's not even gonna recognize me. They're like, well, you can pull the mask down. There was 2 doors to the bedroom. It's what was called positive pressure. And the idea is that the air in the room, the air pressure is so high, it blows everything out. That way none of the germs from outside of the room can be sucked into the room and cause who knows what horrible infections these people with suppressed immune systems have. So, I'm standing there at the door and I pop open the mask and I remember just seeing this tiny frame, little girl. And he had 2 pink buckets, which I now know were emesis bases. And one of them I could see toys in, and the other one I couldn't really see what was in it. And in her hand was a Red Ranger doll. And just playing with the doll, bald as a jaybird. And I remember kind of watching her play for a minute because she didn't know I was there. And she leaned over and she got sick in the other bucket right next to her, toy bucket. And sat up, wiped her mouth, and went right back to playing. I mean, that was just a day in the life of the operation for her at that point. And finally, I think one of the nurses knocked on the window and she turned and looked. I pulled down my mask and immediately she just lit up. I just watched her from her toes all the way up, lit up and smiled. And looked at her doll and looked back at me and then just went back to playing. And that was a moment I'll never forget. So here's this beautiful little life that I had the ability to touch and don't have any more right to touch it than any of you. But I was pretty blessed by it. So the nurses told me that they hadn't seen her smile in 3 months. So that still touches me to this day. So lots of stories like that. And I've seen them in different countries and different languages all over. And it's just, you can't be involved in something like that and not be blown away by the impact. And it took me years and years later to understand the impact I truly had and my castmates truly had on you guys. I mean, we knew the show was popular, but social media wasn't back then like it is today. So we knew we had great ratings, we knew it was super popular, we knew Saban was making billions, and that's what we knew. I knew if I walked down the street, pretty much anybody with kids or young parents was gonna be like, I know that guy. But that was really it. So today, to come back after all this time and to hear your stories, another guy comes up to me in his early 30s and he sits down or stands at my table, and I can tell he's on the brink of something really emotional. And tears are in his eyes, his complexion's going red, and he explains to me, he says, I have to tell you a really important story. And I get these all over the world. He says, my dad and I, one of our favorite things to do, we bonded over watching Power Rangers. And I got to watch you, and you were my dad and I's favorite Ranger. And we loved, he said, we loved how brave you were. And I was like, okay, well, thanks. I couldn't understand the emotion behind that statement yet. And finally he says, when he was 4, after about a year of bonding over the show, he died unexpectedly. So when I went to his funeral, I placed your doll in his coffin because I wanted him to be brave.
Aww.
And what do you say to that? It's kind of cool. Next question. Yes, you? My favorite Power Ranger? Training. Good question. What you got?
I want to say 2 things. First of all, growing up, I think back 20 odd years ago, watching you on TV, I still remember the King Sphinx episode where you have to take them on yourself. It took me 15 years to be able to finally watch that after looking forever to find it. I want to say it's still one of my favorite memories, just watching you on TV. My nephew still loves to see it. He's 6. The second thing I want to say is, I know the big project is the movie The Order.
Mhm.
I've seen you do it. I've seen JC and Frank do it, and all you guys. How big of a part do you have in this, man? It'd be kind of awesome to see you guys
In
back
The Order?
full force in your prime.
In the movie The Order?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much she's going to let me say. How about I can say this? I'm in a extremely prominent position. one that will not go unnoticed.
When's it coming out? I mean, I'm eager to see.
That's a question for Karen. Right now, I know that she's producing that film. I'm just one of the monkeys in front of the camera on that one. So I've got other films I'm producing, but that's not one of them. So she's working some deals behind the scenes. So if you stop by her table, you want to know more about the order, she can fill you in on if, whens, and wheres. I know that we're all hoping to finish it up this year, but there's a huge cast involved in the order. So.
As a clinically ill person, I want to say thank you for hearing the stories of terminally ill people and recognizing and listening to those stories and hearing the impact of those stories. I just wanted to say thank you for that.
You're welcome.
First of all, I just want to say, I love the Power Rangers. You guys are the reason I'm into martial arts. And love every character. I mean, he's the original Red Ranger. How did you feel when Saban made you kind of step down from the leader role so that Tommy could happen?
Well, that's